you're someone who's actually taken quite a lot of risks in the past, speaking up.
On this episode of BBC's Newsnight, you have Mohammed Shafiq, who is the founder of the Ramadan Foundation, on one side of discussion. And of course, you had Douglas Murray in the studio as well as a third unnamed and howbeit dormant guest. The discussion was being had in the wake of reports that teenage girls were being indoctrinated with extremist religious views. And so, that set the tone nicely for what was bound to be an interesting discussion.
Evil criminal men are put behind for a very long time, and I think that's very important. But the central issue is this, that it's a sad reality that there are young Pakistani men, 53 in total of which we know, who've been convicted, who've been going around this country, who've been grooming white teenagers under the age of 16.
Shafiq started out by commending the girls who had come forward with testimony which had ultimately implicated and blown open the jihadi juvenile recruitment ring. To be sure, the actions of these recruiters were deplorable, and so far, 53 Pakistani men have been arrested and convicted of these crimes. And Shafiq condemned their actions without mincing his words.
Nothing to do with Islam, it's got nothing to do with the Muslim community. All it is that people who are born into Muslim households, who are involved in drugs, who are involved in crime, are carrying out these activities.
So when Jack Straw says that there is a sort of pervasive view among many Pakistani Muslim men that young English girls are easy meat.
The host also quoted Jack Straw, who was the British Home Secretary at some point, for being sympathetic to the problem. Shafiq picked up on that sentiment by stating that there were indeed radicalized young Muslims who could be categorized as delinquents. These men did not in any way represent the majority of the Islamic belief system.
There is a perception that some of these young men do not see white girls as equal, as valuable, of high moral standing as they see their own daughters and their own sisters. And I think that's wrong. It's a form of racism that's abhorrent in a civilized society. And that's why I've taken the initiative 2 years ago to speak out against this.
But why were these young white girls being targeted by these men in the first place? We recall that it was these same teenage girls that had brought the crimes to light. Even though Shafiq had earlier on commended them for being brave, in reality, they represented ready meat for jihadi recruiters, even more so than Muslim girls. That much Shafiq admitted to, just as Jack Straw had also suggested.
Exposed this very story we're talking about tonight. The police asked Channel 4 not to show that documentary because the BNP was starting to talk about what they were boasting that it was going to be a great advert for the BNP. Because of that, all sorts of other people came in and said Channel 4 mustn't show this, they mustn't investigate this. Muslim leaders said they shouldn't be doing this.
And when asked about his views, Douglas quickly started out by pointing to a conspiracy and a cover-up surrounding the issue. Apparently, before now, multiple media outlets had been at loggerheads with civil society organizations not to investigate or publish the story. And when the wall of silence, as Douglas called it, was finally torn down, it served to shock the British citizens into realizing that such a thing was indeed going on.
I think you can even hear in the way in which Jack Straw talked about it in your interview, and the way in which any politician or indeed commentator will talk about this, that people feel they are treading on eggshells. Modern Britain has all sorts of taboos, unspoken things that people don't want to get involved in case they're accused of all sorts of unpleasant things. And people,
As far as Douglas was concerned, this was a scandal like any other, except that British society had been in denial until now as to the seriousness of the problem. No one wanted to address the situation head-on or have an honest conversation about the pseudo-sexual aspects of these grooming campaigns, which had in fact been happening for the longest time under everyone's noses.
Obviously makes it harder. It makes it harder for the police.
But what should they do now if we've got over that?
The thing they do now, among other things, is to do it, as Jack Straw mentioned, for the Pakistani communities of this country, Muslim communities in this country, and other communities, of course it isn't just them, to address this problem among their young men, of the way in which young girls are seen, because that is an endemic.
At the present time, political correctness was making it more difficult for the authorities to deal with the problem. However, Douglas suggested that Muslim leaders ought to step in and try to change the perception of Muslim young men on how young girls their age were seen. And it came down to respect for women in general, to the extent that women were not similarly compartmentalized.
Okay.
That's the kind of rights we should be talking about.
Mohammed Shafiq.
Well, you know what? I have to say Douglas is showing his true colours once again, suggesting it's endemic. It's not endemic. The vast majority of British Muslims, the vast majority of British Pakistanis find what's going on abhorrent. They find it evil.
Of course,
and the people I speak to on a daily basis.
On his part, Shafiq disagreed with some of Douglas's views. At first, it appeared Douglas was saying that the problem of young Muslim men being liable to prey on young women was endemic within Islamic society, and Shafiq tried to clear the air on that point. Not all Pakistanians, and by extension Muslims, had such a worldview where women, or young white girls in particular, were objectified. But that aside, there still had to be an honest debate on the matter.
This country, but I think we've got to be very careful in suggesting that something's endemic or is ingrained in these youngsters from an early age.
You don't
What's
think there's
ingrained
a
from an
cultural...
early age is tolerance, respect, and these are basic values. And actually, the criminals, and they should be treated like criminals, and not tarnished the whole community.
You don't think, Mohammed Shafiq, that there is a cultural issue?
Rather than such attitudes being endemic, Shafiq suggested instead that most youngsters who were developing into young adults were in fact taught about decency and good manners while growing up. So, Shafiq categorically disagreed with the notion that it was a cultural problem. And by cultural, the host was pointing to how Muslim boys were generally raised.
Pakistani girls or girls of Pakistani origin?
Stephanie, I've already said that I think there is a perception amongst these criminal gangs. I'm not talking about the majority of the community, I'm talking about these criminal gangs. These people who've been convicted or are involved in grooming feel that the white girls are any less valuable, have less morals than their own daughters and sisters. And I've said that already.
To be clear, the host was referring to Pakistani young men in particular, and that it was the whole conversation revolved around. So it had less to do with the generality of Muslim young men at large. Shafiq had referred to the recruiters as gangs who saw young white girls as impressionable, well enough to be led astray. And wherever they got such an idea from remains a mystery and is best left to the imagination.
It's wrong, and we've got to do something about that. And that's why in the next few months I'll be going over to Holland to see what work they've done. They've successfully reduced their grooming amongst young Dutch girls, and see what lessons we can learn. But
At least, Shafiq, for all intents and purposes, was planning to do something about it in his capacity as an upstanding Pakistani intellectual and rapporteur. He subsequently announced that he hoped to travel to the Netherlands in the days following the studio discussion to see whether he could learn a thing or two there on how they were able to manage the forced recruitment of young girls within their own borders.
This debate was about opening up this issue, opening the taboo topics, and we're having that debate within our Muslim community and the Pakistani community, and I hope that as we move forward to deal with this issue in a structured way, but in a way that respects diversity, respects tolerance, and doesn't throw accusations like Douglas is throwing around.
Shafiq also highlighted the importance of conversations like the one they were having on a platform such as the BBC Newsnight show. But beyond that, he acknowledged that discussions and debates were also being had within the Pakistani Muslim community. And all of it was geared towards calling attention to the sad nature of the issue in order to proffer solutions in a structured manner. And that was in contrast to throwing accusations or being divisive to diversity as Douglas was known to promote. We would like to know your views on this. Why do Pakistani jihadi recruiters think young British girls are susceptible to indoctrination? Tell us what you think in the comments section below.